Hi, everybody. This is What is the Constitution by Patricia Brennan Demuth. This is lesson 5. We're going to look at the second chapter in this book, Who's Coming to Philadelphia? And we're going to look at the pictures first to get our brains engaged. So if you've got your copy of the book, now would be the time to go and grab it. And if you don't have your copy of the book, you can just read along the pages. I'm showing you all the pages as we go. And if your brain's not plugged in, please go plug in your brain and let's get started. So once again, we're previewing the chapter. That means we're getting our brain warmed up, and we're doing that by looking at all the pictures. As we read, we're going to be keeping our brains on and keeping them functioning as best we can, trying to focus our attention. We're also going to be using a bunch of different reading strategies. We've reviewed these reading strategies before, so I'm going to just point your attention now to this bottom one. It says if there are questions to answer, read the questions first. For this chapter, it's Who's Coming to Philadelphia? That's the name of the chapter, and so that would be a good question for us to be able to answer. So if you turn to page 15 in your book, that can help so you can see the pictures a little better, or if you want to label things. And there's the chapter heading, Who's Coming to Philadelphia? So the other thing that stands out in this picture is there's a map. And this would be a map of the original 13 colonies, which became the first 13 states. And maybe you don't know all their names. They're abbreviated here. And the only thing written out is the city of Philadelphia, which is at this time was the capital of the United States. But these others they're just listed with their postal abbreviations from the post office. But here's their names in case you're not familiar. Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Connecticut's over here, New York, New Hampshire over here, and then there's a couple more. If you look up in the top, you can see these two are labeled the same, MA, MA. Well, those are both for Massachusetts. Massachusetts is actually in two parts, and this top part one day will be the state of Maine. Now, Massachusetts is a state we've heard a lot about in the other things we've read, and that's particularly because of the city of Boston. And so there's where the city of Boston lies. If you were to really study this map and think about it, you'd be thinking, wait, there's only 12 colonies listed here. I thought there were 13 colonies. For whatever reason, they have chosen to leave Rhode Island off the map. So there it is, Rhode Island. All right, so there's that original map of the United States. The 13 colonies became the first 13 states starting in 1787. Vermont and Maine aren't states yet. So again, Maine would be this right here, and Vermont is going to be formed right here. It's a chunk of New York is going to become the state of Vermont eventually. Washington, D.C. hasn't been made into the nation's capital yet, and Washington, D.C. is right about there. And Philadelphia was the first capital of the United States. It's where the Declaration of Independence was written, and there it is. This star right here indicates that that's our capital. Now, you might know we have 50 states, and so if you count the stars, you can see there are 50 stars, 50 states. Looking at this page, you can see up at the very top, we have a heading, Philadelphia, a historic city. And then on that page, there's a picture, and there's actually a caption this time. It says State House. So before we move on, let's take a look at this, the few sentences on this page. Again, this is not part of the story, I guess. This is a separate page, and you can tell that this is separate from this stuff because the font is different. So this is a larger font. This is a different font than what is here. So we're going to read this separately because it's not going to flow with the other parts when we get it to reading the text. In 1787, Philadelphia ranked as the nation's biggest city by far. The Declaration of Independence had been signed there at the State House, the very same spot where the convention was being held. Small shops lined the downtown. Ships from around the world came and went from its busy Delaware river port. The city had street lamps, thanks to its famous citizen, Benjamin Franklin. Franklin also started America's first public library in Philadelphia. So you can see some things then by looking at that picture. It gives you some ideas of what that time, what things looked like. Here you can see a carriage being drawn by some horses and some people walking around. Let's take a look at this picture though. And there's no caption this time, so we're going to have to use our brains to try to figure out what's going on here. And so what do you notice? Well, I noticed three people. There's this person here, there's this person here, and a horse. And then there's this person here, and you can see there's a carriage here. And when I take a look at this person, I kind of wonder what's going on. Is he melting? Is it so hot that he's melting into the ground? The road is lava. Well, he's not on fire or anything, so I'm guessing there's something else going on. Perhaps this is mud, and he's stuck in the mud. So perhaps he's trying to do something to get the carriage unstuck, but we don't know. You take a look at the next page. Well, we want to remind ourselves again the main idea of this chapter is it's who's coming to Philadelphia. So here we got a couple of people here, and thankfully they've been labeled for us. George Washington is the taller one on the left. It says he's 6'2" tall, and James Madison at 5'3" tall. So we can see their different styles of clothing. And on to the next page. On page 20, again, there are no captions, so we got to use our brain to try to figure out what is going on. So looking at page 20, you might notice, let's remind ourselves who's coming to Philadelphia. And then if you look over here on 21, you might notice that it says James Madison. So there's this little section that's off to the side that we're going to want to look at. But if you also look at page 20, you might notice not far above where this person is sitting, there's the name James Madison again. So if I'm using my brain, I might be inclined to say perhaps this is James Madison. I don't know. But let's look at the picture to see what else is going on. So this is a person with interesting hair and clothing. This person's sitting in a chair holding a book and a feather. And then also you can see that there are books on a table that are next to this person. In fact, quite a pile of books. In fact, there's so many books, there's books piled up on the floor. That's a little unusual. And let's look at the second, the picture on page 21. What's going on there? Well, there's a smaller person with interesting hair and clothing sitting on the floor holding a book. And there's books on bookshelves behind and next to this person. Says this is not part of the text. Once again, the stuff on this page, it's in a different font. It's got this border around it. So this is a little different than this part of the text. So I'm going to read this part right now. James Madison, 1751 to 1836. Like George Washington, James Madison grew up on a large plantation in Virginia. Poor health kept the young Madison from hunting and horseback riding. Instead, he spent hours in his father's library. By 12, Madison could read French, Latin, and Greek. With Thomas Jefferson as his mentor, Madison threw himself into politics. Under President Thomas Jefferson, he served 2 terms as Secretary of State. In 1809, Madison himself became the 4th President of the United States. So maybe this is James Madison, and maybe this is too. On the next page, here we have page 22, and let's remind ourselves who's coming to Philadelphia is kind of what we're trying to answer, and this picture on page 22 shows quite a crowd. So maybe a big crowd is coming to Philadelphia. And so let's take a look at what's going on in this picture a little bit more carefully. So there are many different kinds of people that are in this picture. They're dressed in all sorts of different styles of clothing. You can see this person's dressed very differently from this person, who's dressed differently from this person, who's dressed differently from this person, and from this person, and so on. So lots of different kinds of people here. In the foreground, that's the front of a picture, you can see that somebody dressed like a soldier and standing next to a cannon, and then there's these puffs of what I would guess are smoke. You can see here in the center of the picture, there's a couple of horses, and there are people on those horses. And then we saw a picture earlier of George Washington, and this person resembles that picture of George Washington, so perhaps that's George Washington. And you might notice there's a flag over here, and then there's a flag that's way up over here, and then there's some buildings and trees in the background. All right, on to page 23, you might notice that there's this picture, but hey, there is a label, there's a caption, and it says Mount Vernon. Now, Mount Vernon is something I know a little bit about. Mount Vernon was the home of George Washington. He lived on a very large farm. We would call that a plantation. And his big house, that property was known as Mount Vernon. And so that is showing the home of George Washington. On to the next page, pages 24 and 25. Once again, we have two pictures without captions. So we're going to, again, try to figure out who's coming to Philadelphia based on what we're seeing here. Turning on our brains and looking at the picture on page 24, we notice I see four people standing and facing different directions, which is weird. They're not talking to each other. They just are all facing different directions. Don't know why. Behind them, there's a building. It looks like it has windows and a door, or doors. These folks all have interesting hair and clothing, like many of the other people we have seen so far in this chapter. On page 25, if you take a look, at first it looks like there's three people. And then if you look more carefully, you can see there's actually five people portrayed here. And the way you can kind of tell is you can look at the feet. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 feet. 1, 2, 3, 4 feet. So there's four people, and then there's this person sitting here. Notice all of them are facing the same direction as they're passing a building, it looks like. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4 folks they're holding, it looks like a pole, and that they're holding up this kind of a box, and it's got a person inside of it. And so it looks to me like there are no wheels or anything. Like this is not touching the ground. It's hanging in midair. And the illustrator's trying to help us understand that by here you can see there's a shadow being cast. And if you take a look at this person, this person appears to be wearing glasses. So maybe there's something else going on here that we can figure out. Our very last two pages in this chapter, 26 and 27, you can see again, we have a heading, Benjamin Franklin, 1706 to 1790. And so presumably this is a picture of Ben Franklin. And you can see, oh, glasses, I wonder if that was the guy in the last picture. We haven't seen a lot of people wearing glasses in the art in this book. So once again, because this section has this border around it and it's in a different font, I'm going to read that now. Everyone called Benjamin Franklin Doctor because he had so many honorary degrees from universities, and yet he had left school at age 10. In time, Benjamin Franklin became one of the great men of his age, an inventor, publisher, scientist, writer, and statesman. The first to discover that lightning was electricity, Ben Franklin tamed the lightning by inventing the lightning rod. He also invented bifocal glasses. After the war, Franklin negotiated the United States peace treaty with England.